Last year we moved from the US to the Silver Coast of Portugal, and in this video we're talking about what we do and do not miss about living in the US, including one thing that might just be a deal breaker for Portugal.
I'm Matt.
And I'm Dawn.
And we're the unretirees. And last year, as I was approaching the traditional retirement age, we knew we didn't want to retire, but we also didn't want to put off our dream of living abroad and traveling the world either. And so today we live and work from the Silver Coast of Portugal. And this channel is about living abroad, remote work, and travel over 50. And we sure would like it if you would like this video, subscribe to our channel, and click the bell notifications so that you don't miss an upcoming video.
You can also connect with us on Instagram at The Unretirees, and we have a free weekly newsletter that you can sign up for. We'll leave both of those links in the description below.
So we've been here now in Portugal for 11 months, and for many of the things we're going to talk about here in this video, they're relatively minor, and for many of them, we're going to figure them out as we live here longer. And honestly, I do think that if we were to do this video a year from now, there probably would be different things on this list.
Yeah, there's really only one thing on this list that we consider to be somewhat significant. And in fact, if we ever made the decision to repatriate back to the US and slow travel instead, it would probably be because of this issue. Now, let me say that we have absolutely no plans to do that. We love it here in Portugal and we are committed to the long haul. But we do think that it's something that is important to consider if you're making the decision between becoming an expat or slow travel. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the video. And I also want to say that Matt and I don't necessarily agree on all of these points. We'll talk about that too.
Now, of course, this is just our experience. And, certainly if we have viewers here who probably have moved from the US to another country, and if you've had different experiences, we'd love for you to include that in the comments below and share them with everybody. So to start, let's talk about some of the things that we don't miss about the US. Now look, we did not leave the US because we were mad or fed up or running away from something. Instead, we were running toward something. We were running toward an adventure and a plan that we had been planning for more than a decade.
Yeah, we do not hate America, far, far from it. But there are pros and cons of anywhere that you choose to live. So with all of that in mind, what are some things that you don't miss about living in the US?
Well, one thing I don't miss, and certainly about living in the US where we lived in New York and in Connecticut, is traffic. Now, we of course live in the Silver Coast, so we're not near a major city. But honestly, the traffic here and the roads, it's just incredible how empty they are and how we just never experience any sort of road delay. And so that is one thing that I don't miss about the US.
Yeah, driving on the Silver Coast really is a dream. Another thing that we do not miss about living in the US is crime. Now, we do talk about this quite a bit on this channel, the safety of Portugal, and I think it's worth mentioning that we didn't personally feel unsafe in the US. In fact, weirdly, the safest we ever felt was the almost 10 years that we lived in New York City. But it did feel like crime was always around. It was always on the news. It was always on social media. We always knew somebody who was impacted by it. And so it really felt like it was very close at all times. And we did not realize when we lived in the United States how hyper aware we were all the time. Keep in mind that crime can happen anywhere. Crime happens here in Portugal. Wherever you are in the world, it makes sense just to be diligent. But I will say that it wasn't until we left the US and we moved to Portugal that we understood the psychological weight of just being on that hyper aware status all the time. We immediately felt less anxious and more calm.
One of the other things that we don't miss about the US is generally the higher prices. Now, when you're in the US and you go to the grocery store, the prices are what the prices are. You sort of think that's where they are. That's kind of the price for things everywhere. And the reality is it's not. I mean, when we moved here, we were astonished by how much less expensive many of the basic things that people need to buy every day for everyday living at the grocery store, at the restaurants are. And so when we go back to the US and go out to dinner, or if we go back to the US and we go to a grocery store, it's it's a bit of a sticker shock for us because things are just so much more expensive.
Next one is politics, and you and I feel a little bit differently about this, but let me just say, we did not leave the US based on politics. We know that a lot of people are or have, and we respect everybody's reasons and their decisions. It's just not part of our story. Moving to Europe was always part of our plan.
For me, the thing that I don't miss has to do with sort of the constant and overwhelming information flow about political events, especially in a presidential year. I don't miss the pundits and the opinion media and
Fake news.
Yeah, just what'd you say?
Fake news.
Fake news.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's just overwhelming. You can't escape it in the US, it seems to me. And honestly, here, it's just so very nice to just not be inundated with it all the time.
Now, we do agree on a lot of that, but I am somebody who checks election headlines every single day, and I will log on and watch the news from time to time. So we do engage with that a little bit differently.
So now let's talk about some of the things that we do miss about the US. And first and foremost, of course, is family and friends. Now, we have two grown sons who live on opposite coasts of the US, as well as other family members who are interspersed in different parts of the country. And so it's not like we were in a position to see everybody on a regular basis anyway. It was required travel to do that. And so, at least for us, we see our boys when we go back to the US or we have them come out to Portugal.
We also had a really great community in New York City, but after the pandemic, a lot of our closest friends moved out of New York City, moved to other parts of the US and even other parts of the world. And so we no longer saw them regularly either. Fortunately, we're able to keep in touch with them on social media and text chains and all the modern things, but that really changed for us after the pandemic. Now, the next one is another one that you and I do not entirely agree on, and that is consumerism.
Yeah, I certainly don't miss the constant barrage of ads and billboards and other things just trying to promote in the United States. I actually didn't even realize that until we moved here. And there's just so much less of it. People are just so less focused on that sort of thing. It's really kind of a nice thing. Now, even for us, I mean, when we lived in the US, seemed like we were constantly ordering things from Amazon.
We were renovating and managing properties.
We were, and not everything, of course, was connected to that. But now we just consume less, and I think it's just a normal thing here.
So I do agree with that for the most part, but there are some brands that are not available here in Portugal that I miss. I miss being able to just go out and get something. Almost anything is available from someplace in the EU, and you can have it shipped in, but I do miss that. I also really just miss brand experiences. I love advertising and marketing and packaging and design and communications. I love all of that. I feel very creatively inspired by that. And especially coming from New York, I do miss that.
So one of the other things that I do miss about the US has to do with sports. Now, look, if you're a sports fan here in Portugal, you can watch the NFL, or you can watch an NBA game, or you can watch PGA golf. All of those things can be found here for the most part. But there are some challenges with that. So first off, the challenge is, of course, we're 5 hours ahead of the East Coast of the US and 8 hours ahead of the Pacific Coast of the US. And so the time of sporting events is just so much later here, and frankly, some of them don't even start till the middle of the night. So practically speaking, it's hard to watch live sports if the game doesn't start until midnight. I mean, even the Super Bowl, as an example, it doesn't get over with until about 2:30 in the morning. So that makes it a little bit tough. Secondly, sometimes you'll watch US-based sports, and they have Portuguese commentators, which is awesome if you're working on learning the language, but if you're really trying to follow what they're saying, it's a little bit of a challenge. And so that's another thing. And then the third challenge, I would say, has to do with the supremacy of soccer here in Europe, in that there will be some things that you expect to be able to find, but you just can't. So for example, the final round of the Women's British Open or the final round of the FedEx Cup here wasn't shown on television because it was Sunday and it was soccer. So every sports channel during the afternoon was just all soccer all the time, and it's just a different experience.
So we're becoming really big soccer fans.
Big soccer
or
fans.
Football, as they say.
That's right.
Another thing that we miss living in the US is just how much easier it is just to get things done. And this has to do with us just still getting acclimated to living in Portugal. But if you think about just the most basic things like finding a dry cleaner or getting a replacement light bulb or buying sheets, all of these things that are just very easy in the US, you know exactly where to go and how to get these things, become a bit of an adventure when trying to find them here in Portugal. There's different stores. It's a lot of them don't have websites, or the websites are very basic. And so that means that we end up spending an entire afternoon going from store to store and town to town looking for one small thing. Now, for the most part, we love this. We understand this is part of the adventure. We get to explore new areas of Portugal. We get to learn more. Like, we're down for that most of the time. But there are times when we just want to get what we need. So as an example, we had to get a pack and play for a guest who was staying with us, and we needed it same day. We couldn't order it online, and we had to figure out, what is that called here? Where do we get one? We ended up going to a lot of different stores to find one that eventually had that. Now, this is not a big deal. This is just us figuring out where to go and how things work here in Portugal. But there are times when we get frustrated and we just want to get something, and we don't necessarily want to spend an afternoon doing it.
So one of the other things that we do miss about the US is, and this may not be cool, casual restaurant chains. So look, here in Nazaré, because it's a town that lots of tourists come to, there are about 100 restaurants in our little town. And so almost all of these are family-owned restaurants, mom and pop restaurants. And we love the adventure of going and trying all of these various restaurants.
And we've had some amazing meals.
We've had some amazing meals. Look, food is not disappointing here, but there are certainly times where you're tired, or you just want to get a good pizza, or you want to get a Jersey Mike sandwich or a Chipotle bowl for dinner, and they're just not here. And so we do miss sort of that convenience of having those kinds of restaurants, of things that that you can count on, that you could just pick up.
This brings us to the one issue on this list that is probably more significant and has impacted us more, and that is the difference in tax and legal structures between the US and Portugal. Now, it's not that one is better than the other, it's just that we understand the US structures so much better. Things like 1031 exchanges and SBA loans and capital gains taxes and all of those different things that we just have more of a knowledge of in the US versus Portugal. Now, we have learned a whole lot in the last year, fortunately, and we have an entire video, in fact, about how to set up a business structure here in Portugal. We'll leave a link to that above.
Yeah, but tax and legal structures are complicated in the US, and we had lived in the US for decades. And over those decades, you sort of pick up little bits and pieces about these things over time, and you don't realize that you've collected an encyclopedia of knowledge around those things because you've been just exposed to those things slowly over time. And you move to a new country and all of that is brand new. All of that encyclopedic knowledge that you have is just gets thrown out. And you're faced with, just an absence of information and knowledge about these things. And so it is a bit of a challenge. And there's probably many things that are available that we just don't know about it. We talk about the fact that there are things that we don't know, and we don't know that we don't know them, which is why it's important to have some advisors that you can rely on to help you navigate the system. But there's also things about wealth building opportunities that, frankly, we're still trying to understand here in Portugal.
And I will say we have some fantastic advisors, and that's why we have learned as much as we have learned. But I mean, anybody watching this, wherever you are, you can relate to the fact that taxes and business and legal structures, I mean, it's just complicated even when you know the language and you're familiar with the country. And so it's just a matter of learning our way through some of those things. Yeah, we just miss having the tools, knowing the tools, understanding the tools. Now listen, this does not change our plan at all. Our goal is still to continue to live abroad and travel, but this is really one issue where we do wonder if it would have been better to keep our home base in the US and slow travel instead. And the reason that we say this is that if you are somebody who is thinking about whether or not you want to slow travel or move abroad full-time as an expat, we do think that this is an important element to consider. So, with all that said, now that we're 11 months in, which country do you prefer, the US or Portugal?
So I would still prefer Portugal. I mean, the cost of living is just so much lower. The safety is so much better. I think there's also an ease to living here that I don't think we experienced in the U.S. Now, if we had a Shake Shack and a Starbucks, or could get excellent pizza right here, it would make it even better. But I think I would still choose Portugal. So for you, same question. Now that we've been here 11 months, which do you prefer?
Well, I want to say we love the pizza at Blue Jardin down.
Oh
in
yeah,
Nice,
we
right?
do. We do.
So we can check that off. Well, other than that last issue that I mentioned, I think our quality of life here in Portugal is infinitely better than it was in the US. We could not have this same quality of life in the US, certainly not for this price. So I really don't feel a big pull, other than friends and family, I don't really feel a big pull back to the US. If you want to know more about why we chose Portugal over Italy, France, and Spain, watch this video.